Okay, so we'll continue. We're on the sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6. If you'll turn there to Revelation 6, we'll start in verse 12, continue through the end of the chapter. We'll just read all these verses, and then we'll go back and talk about what's going on here. Really, this is something that happens after the end of the tribulation period. We mentioned that last time. So the 7 years is up. And it's a reference to once Babylon falls, once the Antichrist, his kingdom, is overthrown at the end of the 7-year tribulation period, this is what happens with the sixth seal here. So in Revelation 6, verse 12, it says, "And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" So this is at the end of the tribulation period. Jesus hasn't come back yet, and that's why it says there in verse 16, verse 17, the great day of his wrath is come. That's a reference to his second coming in this case, and it's about to take place, but it hasn't happened yet. But this happens at the end of the tribulation period. If you look over in Matthew 24, and we'll see that that's where we get that. It'll tell you that after the tribulation period is over, that's when these things happen. You notice from Revelation 6, it said the sun was dark, the moon became blood, the stars fell from the sky. Basically, that's God turning out the lights. The world becomes completely dark. He created the sun, the moon, and the stars on the fourth day of creation. They were for signs and for times and for seasons. And then when they become dark, then they're all, that goes away, basically. It's the earth becomes completely dark. But in Matthew 24 and verse 29, we're told when this happens. It's very similar wording, and it says there, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." And you see from verse 30, we'll keep reading. "And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." So in Matthew 24, we find out once the tribulation period is over, once these 7 years is over, as we've got on the chart here, the second coming of Christ. The sixth seal is specifically referencing the time period that's between the end of the 7th year of the tribulation and the second coming of Christ. I put on your outline that the earth will sit in darkness probably for 45 days. My guess is it's going to be 45 days period between the end of the tribulation period and the second coming of Christ. And during that entire 45 days, the sun's going to be dark, the moon's not going to give her light, and the stars have fallen from heaven. So it's completely dark. If you go over to Daniel chapter 12, I'll show you where I get that. Some people won't agree with, they'll think this refers to something else, and that could be true, but in my opinion, this is where we get the 45 days. And even if it's not 45 days, we do know that there is a time period where it's dark. There has to be a time period between the time when the tribulation period ends and there's darkness in the world, and then the second coming of Christ. There has to be a time where they sit in darkness because of what we see in Matthew 24, and then specifically in the sixth seal in Revelation 6, where you have these people sitting around, they're saying, to the rocks and the mountains, fall on us and hide us from the great wrath of the Lamb. So there is this time period where, in other words, if it was just right away, if everything became dark and then all of a sudden Jesus came, you wouldn't have these people sitting around and say, hide us from that the great day of wrath is coming, hide us from that. They wouldn't have time. It would just happen right away. So there is a time in between. And in Daniel 12, verse 11, this is where I get it. It says in Daniel 12, verse 11, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. That's a reference to the time halfway through the tribulation period, and we talked about this last week, when the Antichrist sets up the image of the beast in the temple and causes all people to worship it. And that's the event of the abomination that maketh desolate that's set up. So that's a reference to you're halfway through the tribulation period. The 1,290 days then would be a reference to really to the end of the tribulation period. That's approximately 3.5 years. And that would take you to the end of the 7-year period. So it says, there should be 1,290 days. And then verse 12 says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. So in verse 11 you had 1,290 days until the end of the tribulation period. And then you've got in verse 12, it says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. So 1,335 days minus 1,290 is 45 days. The reason that the people are called blessed is a reference to them coming really to the marriage supper of the Lamb, being part of the bride of Christ, Israel, finally being joined to Christ and being his bride and then coming into that kingdom. That's why they're blessed. They survived the second coming of Christ. They survived that judgment. So from these two verses, I believe there's that 45-day period from the end of the tribulation period until that event of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And so, but the point is, during that time, the world is sitting in complete darkness. Babylon fell at the end of the tribulation period, so there's no city lights. All those have been taken away by the falling of that city. Anything that man created has fallen at the end of the tribulation period. And then the natural lights, then the sun, the moon, and the stars, God takes those away as well. And it really gives the earth, the people, it's really for Israel. The reason it's done is because of Israel. Romans 11 talks about how that all Israel will be saved. It's not a reference to all physical Jews, but it's a reference to all those who are true, they're both physical and spiritual Jews. In other words, physically they're Jews, and they're the people of Israel who will decide to put themselves under that law covenant and trust in Jesus as their Christ rather than the Antichrist. And this is a time period for them to really contemplate that, what's going on. Because if you got light and you got things, well, you can be around and busy with things. You could be working on the farm, or you could be working on at the office, or you could do whatever. But if it's completely dark, you can't see a thing. There's nothing you can do. A lot of us, or probably all of us, at least at one point, have experienced that. But it's kind of hard to visualize, just because even at night you'll have the sun and you'll have the moon and you'll have the stars. Even when the moon isn't shining, when there's a new moon, you'll still have some stars. You'll still have, even if you're out in the country, you don't have any city lights, you're still going to have at least some light. But this is a time when those stars and everything's gone away. It's complete darkness. And if you go over to Exodus chapter 10, in Exodus there are these 10 plagues. I'm sure you're all familiar with, where God had sent these 10 plagues upon Egypt, and had asked Moses to lead Israel from Egypt, and he sent these 10 plagues to get them to release Israel. Egypt in the Bible is a type of that, a type of sin. It would be a type, in this case for Revelation, it's a type of Babylon, and God is calling Israel, the saved people in Israel, to come out of Babylon and to be part of his kingdom. And there's a type of that here in Exodus 10. Well, one of the plagues, if you look down at verse 21, there was actually a plague that was darkness. In Exodus 10, and starting in verse 21, it says, "The Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt." A lot of times when, like I say, when we're in darkness at night, you don't really feel it. You may see it's dark, or you may be scared to go outside and investigate something because you can't see that well. But as actual darkness which may be felt, that's complete, total, utter darkness. But notice in verse 22 it says, "And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven. There was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings." So you have complete darkness, such darkness that can be felt, but yet there's Israel, and they've got some light. And so since this is a type of what's going to happen in the tribulation period, you're filling the blank there, is that even though the earth will sit in darkness probably for 45 days, believing Israel will have light. Believing Israel will have light. And that's just, there's no indication in the book of Revelation about that. That's just assuming that what's true in Exodus, that plague of darkness there that could be felt, if that carries over to Revelation, then believing Israel will be in light. And that seems to be the case, just because then that gives the sign. Because again, this is a period where they're sitting in darkness, and if you're in darkness for 45 days, you can't do anything. You've got a lot of time to think. I mean, some of us have been in a hospital and you've gone through an operation. You can't really do much. You're sitting there and you're doing a lot of thinking. And this is a time for the whole world to do some thinking. Look at what the events have gone on over these last 7 years. And what are they going to do about it? Most of the Gentiles have taken the mark of the beast, bowed down to the image of the beast. Their fate is sealed in the lake of fire. A lot of Israel, though, haven't made that decision. Some of them have decided to trust in God, have faith in that law of covenant. A lot of them really haven't made up their minds. And so this is a time, they've got 45 days to sit around and think about it. Which side are they going to be on? They've seen the events of the tribulation period. They've seen the rise of the Antichrist and how he proclaimed he was God, but yet then they've seen the fall of it and how God has come and taken that away. Babylon has fallen. So they've got to make some choices. If you go over to Matthew 25, there's a parable about the 10 virgins here in Matthew 25. And I think this goes along with what we're seeing in the sixth seal, referencing that time when they're going to be in darkness and they have the time to decide what they're going to do. I mentioned believing Israel, and in Matthew 25 we've got this parable of the 10 virgins. Now, Israel is represented by 12 tribes. When we get to Revelation 7 next week, we're going to see the 12 tribes of Israel. They're still alive, they're still in operation. Even though people even Jews today can't identify what tribe they're a part of, God knows what tribe each Jew is a part of, and He, in Revelation 7, is saving those 12 tribes. In Matthew 25, we don't have 12 virgins, we have 10 virgins. And you think about, a lot of times there's that, in Israel there's a division among the 12. There's a 10 and 2 division. EC mentioned in the question about how the king of Judah, they also had a king in Israel by the same name. The division Judah was God's people. David was from Judah. Jerusalem was in Judah. The temple was there. And they had 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Then the other 10 tribes were part of the northern kingdom of Israel. Still part of Israel, but as far as God was concerned, He had set them aside. They were not His people, according to Hosea 1, because of their unbelief and their apostasy. So you had that division in Israel, the kingdom divided between Israel and Judah, 10 and 2. When Israel, after they'd been led out of the land of Egypt and they were in the wilderness, in Numbers chapter 14, God told Moses to send out 12 spies to spy out the land. out of those 12 spies, 2 came back, Joshua and Caleb, and said, it's a good land, we can take it. They are a picture of the believing remnant. 2 believed, 10 didn't. And so when we get to Matthew 25 and verse 1, when it talks about the 10 virgins, I think what we've got here are really, that division is still there. You've got the believing Israel, the believing remnant, represented by the 2. And then the unbelieving part of Israel represented by the 10. And so in Matthew 25 verse 1, it says, Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. So, you can think about, that's where we are in the 6th seal of Revelation. The kingdom of heaven is going to come because of Jesus' second coming pretty soon. They went forth to meet the bridegroom. Once that darkness period is over, Jesus comes back. Verse 2 says, And 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps, and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with the lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. So notice the tarrying period is a reference to the tribulation period. Jesus ascended back to the Father after his resurrection, and he's sitting at the Father's right hand until God makes his enemies his footstool. And so he is tarrying, so to speak. He's tarrying and waiting for Israel to be saved. And that's that 7-year tribulation period. So while he's waiting, you notice it doesn't say that the wise were alive and they're awake and they're alert. It says all slumber. In verse 5 it says they all slumbered and slept. Both the wise and the foolish, both groups slumbered and slept during that time. They didn't believe. They didn't go out to Israel, to the lost sheep of Israel, to see that they would be saved. Verse 6 says, And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Well, if all 10 virgins are slumbering and sleeping, they obviously didn't cry. They didn't see the bridegroom. The bridegroom is coming. They're not recognizing it because they're asleep. So this must be a different group. Somebody other than the 10 virgins is making this cry. And I believe this is a reference to believing Israel, the faithful remnant. It's not to say that 2 tribes are saved and 10 aren't, because in Revelation 7 we do see that all 12 tribes are sealed. But it's a picture showing that not all of Israel is saved at this point. You have just the believing remnant as represented by the southern kingdom of Judah, or those 2 tribes, and then the unbelievers in Israel are the 10, as represented by the 10 virgins. And then as we keep reading here, it says, Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. Verse 9, But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So the ones who were ready were the wise. Those were the 5 virgins who were wise. Verse 11 says, Afterward came also the other virgins, those would be the 5 foolish virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know ye not. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So what you've got in this parable, and we don't have time to go through all the details, but basically it's saying the kingdom of heaven is likened in these 10 virgins. You've got the believing remnant who is alive. They're watching, they're waiting, they see the signs, and they see that the end of the tribulation is there. And so during that 45-day period of darkness, you've got believing Israel in light. And they're saying to the rest of Israel, saying, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. It's time. There's another passage, and we'll get to it later. I've got in here, but so we won't go over that now. But the point is, you've got the believing remnant there, and if believing Israel is in light and the rest of the world is in darkness, just like we saw in Exodus 10 with the plague of darkness during the days of Egypt and Moses back then, that's a pretty good indication that you should probably listen to the people who are in light. If you're in darkness and they're in light, and the people who are in light say, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. You better heed that warning. These people are probably in the right here. They probably, their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ to save them, as opposed to the Antichrist, was not a faith that was in vain. It was a solid faith based on the truth of God's Word, as evidenced by the fact that they're in light and not in darkness. And from this parable we see that half of those in Israel are ready, and they do go into the kingdom, whereas the other half don't. So I've put on your fill in the blank there, it appears that over half of all Jews will be saved. It appears that over half of all Jews will be saved. That's a reference to the believing Israel who give out the cry, so that's that part there. And then you've also got the 5 out of the 10, which would be half, so that makes it over half. Again, that's not to say, that doesn't go against what Paul says in Romans 11. Paul says in Romans 11 that all Israel shall be saved. But the point is that all Israel isn't everybody who is a physical Jew. Of those who are physical Jews, over half are going to be saved. And those who are saved, as God calls them, is all of Israel. Galatians 6 verse 16, there's a reference to the Israel of God. And that's really what's in view here. It's not just because you're physical Jews. In John chapter 8, you had Jesus talking to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees said, obviously they are physical Jews. He says, we be children of Abraham. And Jesus says, you're really children of the devil because you're following the devil's lie program. And he is the father of that program. You're not following the truth of God. So even though they're physical Jews, Jesus says, you're not spiritual Jews. You're not of the Father. You're really of the devil. So when Romans 11 talks about all Israel will be saved, that's all those who are the Israel of God. All who are both physical and spiritual Jews. And according to Matthew 25, it appears that over half of all the physical Jews are the ones who are saved. And I've got another reference there you can look up on your own time, Joel 2 verse 32, where it's referencing the same time. It mentions the sun going dark, the moon becoming as blood, just like we saw in Matthew 24, just like we see in Revelation 6. And it says there about the great time. This is the great time of Jewish salvation. So, but I want to move on here in Revelation chapter 6. If we go to, let's look in the passage here, Isaiah 34. Because the next thing to note is once they're in darkness and once that period is over, we're told about the heaven departing as a scroll. And that's where really heaven and earth pass away. And I wrote on your outline, that's a reference to Jesus' second coming. And we've got that over in Revelation 19, but I did want you to see this one here in Isaiah chapter 34, because it talks about the same type of thing with the sun, moon, and stars not giving their light anymore. And then it's connected with Jesus' second coming, the judgment that He gives at that time. So just to connect, because the sixth seal is talking about all these lights going out, the sun, moon, and stars, and just to connect it with Jesus' second coming, we see that here in Isaiah 34, starting in verse 4, where it says, all the host of heaven shall be dissolved. That's a reference to Satan's army, by the way. That's not the angels in God's realm. That's Satan's army. The host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll. That's just what we read about in Revelation 6:14. Heavens passing away. And the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down. Again, that's a reference to Satan and his army. As the leaf falleth off the vine, and as a falling fig from the fig tree. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. Idumea is a reference to Edom. Edom is a reference to Esau. Esau is the one who was opposite of Jacob. We read last week about how Esau sold his birthright, not having faith in God's promise to bring him into the kingdom. So when it says it shall come down upon Idumea, it's a reference to all of unbelieving Israel getting God's judgment. Again, you can see that not all physical Jews are saved. Edom or Esau was a physical Jew because he was born of Isaac, just like Jacob was born of Isaac. Esau, though, because he was in unbelief, is not considered part of the nation of Israel. Instead, God continued the seed line through Jacob and not through Esau. So God brings His judgment here upon Edomia, or upon all the unbelievers in Israel, and also upon the people of my curse to judgment. So you can see from these two verses here that the event of the sixth seal and the darkness and then the heavens going away is linked to Jesus' second coming and the judgment at that time. And I've written a couple other references. You can see that heaven and earth are changed. Now if we'll go to 2 Peter in chapter 3, you can let go of Isaiah. So talking about at the end of that darkness, when the darkness is over, this is why most Christians have heard this verse quoted. They know this verse. And I think with the background that we've learned today about the fact that the sun, moon, and stars cease to give their light, I think that helps us understand this verse. Because a lot of times you'll hear this quoted. They'll confuse it with the rapture, which it's not. It's referring to Jesus' second coming, not the rapture. But a lot of times people just, they know this verse, they could probably quote it, but yet they don't really think about the words and what it means. But if we have that knowledge that we've learned today from the sixth seal and being in darkness, it helps us understand. It says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night." Well, if you've got darkness, then it's nighttime. And so you can see the analogy here. When Jesus comes, it's a time of complete darkness on the earth, except for where believing Israel is. And He comes as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. So you see that there. And if you just go back to chapter 1, in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19, then you see again the analogy of what we talked about, how believing Israel will be in light, but the rest of the earth will be in complete darkness, probably for 45 days, a darkness that can be felt. And you can see the difference between light and dark here in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. "We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto ye do well that ye take heed, as unto a light